Hello, it's Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter here. I'm in my kitchen and I'm just ironing a block that I'm doing for a quilt, and I'm using my Fortnum and Mason coronation tea towel as a background. Isn't it lovely against these fabrics? Right, now I don't normally add sashing to my quilt blocks, and there are a few tips I want to share with you. Remember, I'm an amateur doing this, so there are many ways to doing it. I'm just showing you one way to do it, and I'm going to share with you the pros and cons here. I've just ironed this flat as best I can. This is a 4 fabric quilt block that I'm making up in a square quilt for a friend. Now, there are pros and cons to adding sashing. Let me talk to you about the pros first. The first thing is that it divides a block. My block is going to be a finished 12 inches. And this will divide between each block. There are 16 blocks in my quilt. Now, I'm creating my own pattern here, and I had to do some calculations. I'll talk to you about that in a moment. It adds to the size of the quilt, so rather than putting more blocks together, especially if you're short of fabric, especially your focus fabric, it's one way of adding size to your quilt without needing more of that focus fabric. It certainly adds interest, and it draws the attention and the eye, depending upon whether you do a repeat fabric or a contrasting fabric, either in the sashing or in the cornerstone. It does look professional once you've done it, and it shows an additional ability to show off your skills and talents. I think this is a skill I'm just learning. I don't pretend to be expert at this, but I'm quite pleased with that as my first attempt. Now, the cons are that you need more fabric because you're adding more fabric to it. I had a limited amount of my main fabric. My contrasting fabrics, both of these, but I had unlimited amount of this, which is why I'm repeating it with that contrast fabric. In this quilt, I've used a light, a medium and 2 darks, and you'll see that in order to get the best effect from the sashing, I've got a contrast between the block and the sashing. And then I've got a contrast again between the sashing and the cornerstone. In this case, my cornerstone is a dark and my sashing would be a mid-tone. I'll show you that in grayscale too, because you can check that. Now, you'll also see that my focus fabric has a directional print. So I've been adding sashing to the right and underneath, and I've chosen to do the one at a time method because I'm not expert at this, and I wanted to make sure I got that cornerstone in the right place at the right time, and I found it easier to do it this way. Some people, or the experts, will just do the whole of they'll do a huge king-size quilt and they'll do the whole strip of the sashing at once. That wasn't for me, not on this occasion anyway. Now, it does take more fabric, so it'll cost more, and it means that it'll cost more in batting and backing, and it'll add weight to your quilt. So consider those factors as well when you're deciding how big, how wide you want your sashing to be, and how much you want to add to the size of your overall quilt and the overall weight. I added the sashing. I did the side seams first and then went to the lower edge, and I'd added the cornerstones onto this piece of sashing first. As I've ironed it, I've ironed my seams underneath the sashing so that as the quilt will fall, there'll be a slight raise in the sashing all the way around. Another factor here is when you put sashing between your blocks, you use the secondary patterns that you create. Let me show you here that once I sewed this with a 1/4 inch seam, I'd end up with diamonds here, 4 diamonds with a cross in the middle. I'm going to lose all of that with putting the sashing in. So it depends on whether you're going to enhance or draw attention away from what you want the attention to be on. When calculating the size, always allow for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this was cut at 2 inches. My finished sashing will be 1.5 inches wide. Cut the correct lengths. I cut mine a little bit short and I needed to go back and cut some more. Cut your cornerstones the width of your fabric. So if you're using a jelly roll, for example, cut your cornerstone at 2.5 inches to match the width of the jelly roll. Here I cut my cornerstones at 2 inches to match the sashing width, and it means by the time I lose 4 seams, my finished cornerstone will be 1.5 inches in diameter. What I will get with this is a repeat pattern from the sashing and the cornerstone catching your eye at the finished quilt. How many to cut and how many you need, let me give you a tip that I use. I grab a piece of A4 copy paper, and you can do it like it's the back of the envelope. Now this doesn't need to be mathematically correct, because I'm using 1/2 inches here. It's actually quite difficult to do on graph paper even, especially when you've got a design like this. However, to work out my sashing, I wanted, this is my block, I wanted sashing between each block. You can see I've got 16 blocks here in a square design. And then I wanted to divide the rows with a sashing and cornerstone, and I found it really helpful to actually count. I haven't got a border of the sashing fabric around this quilt. It's going to be borderless as far as the sashing is concerned. If I wanted to completely encapsulate this in the same fabric, I would class it as a border. Right, so I looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces. So I needed to do 12 of the strips to the right on 12 blocks of fabric. And then for the pieces that have had the cornerstones adding, you're looking at 1, 2, 3. One of them needs sashing without a cornerstone. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I now need to cut, because I'd forgotten about 1, 2, 3 pieces, where the end pieces and the pieces at the bottom are going to need a piece of sashing beneath them. This is just for your eyes, and it's helpful if you're creating your own design, or you decide that you've done a block and you want to alter the pattern slightly, and you're not quite sure how much that you need to cut. I always do my cutting measurements as well to make sure I've got enough fabric so that I can complete that design. I'm going to go back and correct what I've missed off before I go anywhere. Tip, I would say, check your pattern as you go, and you can spot mistakes easily. Make sure that for your sashing you have more fabric available in case you make cutting mistakes or sewing mistakes. I've got plenty of this left. And correct your errors as you go. That way, if you're an amateur like me, you'll not repeat that same mistake again. This is the first time I've done this. I'm just sharing what I've learnt with you here. Just correcting that mistake by adding sashing to the bottom of 3 of my blocks. I still have my walking foot on because it's convenient for me. My colour thread is the same as my fabric colour, which is cream. My stitch length is 2.5, and I'm just making sure I'm getting an accurate 1/4 inch seam by using my 2 seam guides. Now you'll see that I have ironed and I've got them as flat as I can. I'm going to lay this out on the bed. So I hope that's helped anybody as a little mini guide to sashing, especially if you're doing it for the first time. Now I'll be uploading the video showing the completion of the topper of this quilt within the next week. Come back and join me for that, won't you? Don't forget to like, subscribe so that you don't miss that. And come back and join me again soon, won't you? Or take a look at any of the other videos that I've uploaded already. This is Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter. Bye.